What's up, Tim Cant here, and in this video I'm going to make a bass line inspired by Urban Shadown featuring Debo General's classic Some Justice 95, also known as Arsonist. Here's what it sounds like. So this is similar to a Dred Bass, but while the Dred Bass is a low-pass filter opening over a square wave oscillator, we're going to use a slightly different oscillator waveform plus some distortion and EQ to get a different tone. In Serum, we'll start with the initial patch, turn oscillator 2 on, and set both oscillators to the sine shape. To get our more complex oscillator sound, we're going to use Serum's phase distortion capability. Serum's manual describes phase distortion thusly. This is similar to FM, except that the phase is modulated instead of the frequency. Sounds complicated? It's not really, so let's just set it up. Oscillator A is going to be our voiced oscillator, which is what we're going to hear, and oscillator B is just going to be the phase distortion source, which we don't need to hear in the mix, so we'll turn the level of this oscillator all the way down. We set oscillator A's warp to PD, PDB, which tells Serum we want to use oscillator B as the phase distortion source. When we turn this modulation level up, oscillator B has more and more of an effect on A, giving us an increasingly harmonically rich sound, which does indeed sound very similar to FM synthesis. We can get a different harmonic timbre by adjusting the pitch of oscillator B. Let's turn it up 2 octaves and set the level to 41%. This gives us something with a square-like timbre that's pretty solid, though it's not particularly pleasant sounding when it's static like this. Let's set the random phase of both oscillators to 0, which makes sure the oscillators start at the same point of the waveform every time they're played, giving us a consistent sound. To provide our movement, we're going to use a modulated low-pass filter. We activate the filter, turn key track on so that the filter cutoff frequency follows the note played, then set the cutoff to 200 Hz with a resonance of 27%. With the filter static like this, we just get a dulled version of the voiced oscillator, so let's modulate the filter cutoff frequency with LFO1 with a modulation amount of 35%. This modulation gives us an animated wow sound. Let's turn off the LFO to host tempo sync, and this will give us finer control over the LFO speed. Let's set the LFO rate to 2.1 Hz. Now we've got the base of our sound, let's activate the distortion. Select the asymmetric distortion type and turn the drive up to 67%. Now we have something that's much closer to the Arsonist sound, and we can get yet closer with EQ. Let's add an EQ effect before the distortion. Set the first EQ's type to peak mode, set the gain to 7.7, and experiment sweeping the frequency while you play the sound. This allows us to really dial in the distorted feel we want. Let's go for a frequency of 1200 with a Q of 47. We can also tweak the shape of the LFO curve, and therefore the feel of the opening filter. For the final touch, let's put it in mono, so we can only play a single note at a time. Now you might be thinking at this point, with all this filtering and distortion, could I not just use a square wave oscillator source and get basically the same effect? Well, not really. Let's hear how it sounds with the square wave oscillator. Sure, it's a big blobby bass, but it doesn't have the characteristic mid-range definition that the phase distortion version has. However, the square version does have a beefier low end. If we check on span, we can see that the fundamental frequency isn't loudest, which means that this sound could be beefier. We could do something like add a dedicated sub, and if we bypass the sub oscillator's routing to the effect by using the direct setting, we could add one in the instrument itself. Instead, let's use another equalizer, which will give us another opportunity to tweak the sound. We'll place the equalizer after the distortion and boost the low shelf with a gain of 4.3 and a frequency of 143 Hz. Let's sweeten the low mids with the peak band set to 213 Hz with a gain of -9.3. I feel like this patch is decently close to the Arsonist bass sound, but more importantly it gives us a jumping off point for tweaking the sound and making it our own. For example, if we pitch up the octave level of oscillator 2, we can get a screechy dubstep or bassline house type of sound. Try experimenting with the filter, LFO, distortion and EQ settings too, and also resampling might prove useful. I hope you've enjoyed this jump up bass tutorial. I offer private tuition, there's a link in the description, plus links to some of my releases to check out. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.